you all hear me? Do you hear me better now? So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our first Friday, where we are welcoming Captain Kailie Benson, and I'll have more to say about the captain in a few moments. But again, I wanted to welcome you. To those of you who don't know me, I'm Kailie Benson. I've been here about 7 months. I'm the development officer, and it's my thrill and my privilege to be with the Maritime Museum. Just a few little highlights before Jack comes over and shares a few details with you. Our next First Friday is on September 1st, and that will be a very special occasion to learn about the museum from the perspective of our docents. So that should be a wonderful occasion for all. We do have an important ceremony tomorrow, the Rybacki Award, and for those of you who are interested, it's at 11 a.m. on our back lawn because the sun promises to shine. But that's a wonderful occasion that happens every year. So of course you're most welcome to join us. Jack, you have a few words.
Sure. You know, we have a tradition when we open up with this song. That makes it official. And there's a captain on that. So it's perfect. Yeah, thanks for coming tonight. I wanted to share with you some news about the museum. You may have noticed there's somebody missing tonight.
Yes, I have.
And that's our executive director, Chris Silva. Chris has decided to move on to another position. He actually has a business that he has up in Maine, and he decided that he wanted to spend more of his time there. He felt it was a more lucrative opportunity for him. So that puts us in a position where we're going to have to do an executive director search, and we're in the process of kicking that off. We have a team that's working on just making sure that our job description for the executive director position is up to date and current, and we'll be opening that up to applicants within the next week or so. It's going to be a two-step process. In the interim, we'll be looking at an interim director position, and that'll be announced imminently, probably within the next week, because we don't want to rush ourselves in terms of getting the executive director to get that right. So, so if you know of anybody, we're really interested in folks that know the local community and have the kind of background we're looking for that can help manage and organize the museum. Let me know, and or anybody on the staff. Fortunately, we've got a great staff with Kailie Benson and Dee downstairs who we met, and all our volunteers, as well as our docents. So the ship keeps on sailing. But we will have to go through that search process over the next 2 or 3 months. So any questions? Give me those names. We're really interested in it. Yes, ma'am.
So where will the job be announced? What's your vehicle advertisement?
Yeah, we're going to a few museum websites, and we're also going to put it on Indeed, Indeed.com. That seems to be the predominant job website these days, but we'll also be on some specific museum websites, and we'll have it on our own website, so we'll post it there as well. Yeah, good question. So, yeah, we're really interested in anybody. I've already got a few folks from the community that said, I'm interested, so we're following through the process. Very good. We'll turn it back over to Kathleen.
Okay, so as I mentioned, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Captain Kailie Benson, and we're delighted that she's with us this evening. Captain Benson oversees all Coast Guard missions from the Massachusetts-New Hampshire state border south to Manamat, Point, Plymouth, Mass, and extending 200 nautical miles offshore. She is designated as Captain of the Port, Federal On-Scene Coordinator, Officer in charge of Marine Inspections, Federal Maritime Security Coordinator, and Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator. Captain Benson commands 1,500 active duty, reserve, and civilian and auxiliary personnel, and she employs 3 cutters, which she promised she didn't take this evening to come here, and 22 boats across the 5 multi-mission stations and an aids to navigation team. Prior to her current role, she served as Chief Office of Emergency Management and Disaster Response at the USCG headquarters. She has traveled extensively throughout Europe, Northwest and Central Africa in support of the U.S. Congregational Mandate to assess anti-terrorism measures implemented in the ports of our maritime trading partners with the intent to improve supply chain security. She's originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, beautiful place. She is a graduate of St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and earned a Master of Arts degree in International Relations from the University of Oklahoma. She has been awarded 2 Meritorious Service Medals, Joint Service and Coast Guard Commendation Medals, Joint Service and Coast Guard Achievement Medals, and has earned the Marine Safety Insignia. And on top of all of that, she has a family and 2 pretty impressive children from a brief conversation. So I am delighted to introduce her and enjoy this evening.
Can you hear me in the back? Great. If I ever fade out, just wave at me in the back, and that'll be my cue to raise my volume. So thanks everyone for the warm welcome. I'm ever so pleased to be here this evening. I was thrilled to get the invitation to come and speak here this evening, and I always love coming to Newburyport, and any excuse, not that I need an excuse because I got a station just down the road, but any excuse is always very welcome. So you heard a little intro about me. I'm happy to talk, if you've got questions later on. But I decided as I was looking at what they were interested in for me to talk about tonight, I embarked on a little journey to try to figure out, all right, you got to figure out your audience. I got to figure out how much time I've got. And then I have to make it interesting so that nobody falls asleep. So that'll be my challenge. And I'm really glad, thanks to Kathleen, that she emailed me about what to wear tonight, because I was going to wear the more formal dress jacket. And thank you, Kathleen, because I forgot about the air conditioning situation here. So I'm really grateful for that one. So I was trying to anticipate the crowd, and I thought, well, let me go with this. So if I judged correctly, who remembers David Letterman? All right, good. All right, good. So we're tracking so far. All right. We're on a roll. So I decided to, I harvested some slides. I've only got 150 of them. You'll be out of here by 10:30, I promise. It'll be a short night. It'll be a breeze. We'll get through it quickly. So I decided to weave in just kind of a story of what we are at Sector Boston, which is representative. We have 37 sectors across the country, including in Guam and Hawaii and Puerto Rico. So none of them really look identical, but they have a smattering of similarities in the mission sets and sort of our construct in our organization. So I just thought I would talk a little bit about that, but I was going to put it in the framework of a Dave Letterman top 10. So this way you can keep track of me and you know how close you are to the end. All right? All right, good. So here we go. Gave me a clicker, I have to remember to use. So number 10, I love hats. I get get to wear a lot of hats. And it's not just me. I am physically and symbolically the one who's been bestowed these regulatory authorities in order for us to perform our missions under. So this is a slide actually that we use at our schoolhouse that talks about the different things that the Coast Guard, that a Coast Guard sector does, right? Somebody much smarter than me made a brilliant graphic that delineates what those look like. So you may hear me refer to, or me or anybody in my position, by a number of different titles. Captain of the Port is probably the most frequent, the most well-known perhaps, depending on what circles you run in. So I am the Captain of the Port for the Boston area of responsibility. So it's not just Boston, it's what Kathleen mentioned, from the New Hampshire border, just a little bit north of here, all the way down to Plymouth, Massachusetts. So that's one of the authorities, and we kind of ascribe that one to sort of being like the maritime doctor, right? We do a lot of activities underneath that Captain of the Port authority, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. The next one is SAR Mission Coordinator. That's the one that hits the news most frequently, right? So vessels sinking, vessels on fire, fatalities, boating fatalities, fishing vessel issues, offshore, fires, sinkings, that sort of thing. It's all under the Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator role that I hold. Federal On-Scene Coordinator, so this is our environmental side of our personality. So maritime environmental response, maritime environmental protection, very much ingrained in the Coast Guard personalities, and very important to our mission sets. So I am the Federal On-Scene Coordinator for the Maritime Zone. So EPA is the Federal On-Scene Coordinator for the Inland Zone, and there's a zone that's defined in the Code of Federal Regulation that delineates our two zones, and roughly that's Route 1. Next one is Federal Maritime Security Coordinator. So that is a lot of our law enforcement perspectives. We have committees who are focused on planning and readiness for to mitigate against a terrorism threat or any sort of security event here in our area. Officer in charge of marine inspection. We have a couple of folks in this room who are familiar with what that is. That hat is our commercial vessel compliance program. So if you've got, well, of course, our deep draft vessels that come in and out of the larger harbors, those are inspected underneath this authority, all the way down to the launch that might take you from your yacht club to your sailing vessel at mooring. That launch tender and that and the operator are regulated. Their license and the inspection status of that vessel are regulated under this authority. Number 9. So it's a good thing that I love little boats, because otherwise my job would be really, a poor match, right? So this is number 9. This is a smattering. Am I blocking your way? Are you able to see them? If this comes off, it's wired, so I won't mess. Okay. So there's 3 slides on this, so it's sort of a misnomer. There's not going to be like 94 slides. Our northern AOR, our central portion, and then our southern AOR. So you may recognize some of these vessels up here. These are our assets, our physical assets, with which we perform our functions, our law enforcement functions, our search and rescue functions, whatever may happen to come in play. They're multi-mission platforms. We have several of them here at the Merrimack River Station. This picture actually needs to be updated. This vessel on the bottom, we no longer have. This is the Key Largo right there. Key Largo was a 110-foot class, island class vessel, and she was decommissioned last year. So the top vessel, that's a 47-foot vessel right there. We've got those here on the river, and also 29-foot response boats small. Similarly, in our southern AOR, we have Station Point Allerton, which is the dot up here. So that's Hull. And then we have Station Situate, which is a seasonal station. It's open from May until roughly October. Every year it seems to get a little bit longer that we hold it open depending on boating season. Station Situate, once upon a time, was a full-time station. But with the advent of better technology in our boats, the decision was made some time ago, nearly 20 years ago, to make it a seasonal station. And this is what's in the middle. Similar, but not the same. We have 45-foot response boat medium in Boston Harbor. We've got 29-foot response boat small, just like here at Merrimack. We have the Sturgeon, which is an 87-foot patrol boat, and it won't be long before Sturgeon goes the way of Key Largo. We haven't gotten a date yet, but at some point, probably within the next couple of years, Sturgeon will get decommissioned, and I'll tell you why here shortly. Because we also love big boats, or bigger boats. Some people might call it a ship. Those who drive it call it a ship, but I don't drive it, so I can call it what I want because I'm the captain of the port. That is a fast response cutter. 154 feet, and we're getting 6 of them. We have a few of them, they have arrived already. Hot off the press, being built down on the Gulf Coast. Purpose-built, very fast, very capable platform with cutting-edge technology on board. We used to, back in the day, we used to put our patrol boats in different ports, sort of scattered along the coast, like we did with Gloucester. Gloucester had Key Largo, and I think even a few years ago, I think there was even 2 there at a time. And we've done that up and down the coast. However, decisions were made that it's actually more efficient from a logistics perspective to home port them in clusters from a maintenance and upkeep perspective. So that's why all 6 of these fast response cutters will be home ported in Boston. They're not Boston-only assets. They only belong to me from an administrative control, which means that I own all the people and all the people problems and all of their pay and all of the logistical types of items that go into the care and feeding of any crew. They get tasked by our district office, which is our next echelon higher, and our district office just happens to be down the street from my office. They're also on the Boston waterfront. So they do the tasking of these vessels, and they're really New England assets because of their ability to go push further offshore, be out a little bit longer, and their needs are across New England. Predominantly, these are being used for living marine resources, which is our mission that focuses on fisheries enforcement, fisheries protection. They can also be used for search and rescue, and they are quite frequently. They're also a multi-mission platform. They can do a lot of different things depending on what we need them for. All right, number 8. I also love ships. So here you see, that's what I call a ship. Now the people that drive the Coast Guard cutters, they like the 154-foot ones. They call those ships. I call this a ship. We focus a lot on the maritime transportation system as a whole, understanding the importance of what making sure we do to keep our marine highway flowing, waterways open, making sure the vessels that are running on them are safe and that they're secure, that they're doing the things they're supposed to be doing, and that they're received at shoreside facilities that are also safe and secure and doing the things that they should be doing, so that we we are enabling or facilitating a smooth supply chain in our area of responsibility. So maritime transportation is one of our biggest tasks. I would say it's probably one of our two most important alongside search and rescue. It doesn't get as much press as the search and rescue mission does, but this is the mission set that keeps ships arriving and departing, bringing goods in, taking goods out, and doing so in an efficient manner. So it's super important, and Boston is a really important hub port for New England. Of course, not as large as New York, of course. Everybody, I think, knows that New York, New Jersey ports are, that's the largest port on the eastern seaboard for sure. But Boston is a really critical port for New England, and we do have a couple of other smaller deep water ports that receive deep draft ships. Salem has been kind of out of the deep draft ship business for a little while once they changed their power plant, but soon we'll be seeing deep draft ships back in Salem supporting the offshore wind industry as they're in the process of organizing and building a logistics hub in order to help facilitate the building of those windmills that will then get taken offshore and installed off of the Cape and the islands and potentially in the future other places. We also have Braintree on the South Shore that also receives petroleum products as well. So maritime transportation system, super important to the economy of the United States, super important to the economy of New England. It's also why you have gasoline for your car and home heating oil for your homes or natural gas. We do receive liquefied natural gas via ship, which assists the pipeline as well. So super important mission statement. All right, number 7. I love the ocean. This is why it's good to be the sector commander. Also in our mission sets, this is just a little snapshot of some of the things that folks on our team work on. The aids to navigation, of course, supports our maritime transportation system, not only for the deep draft vessels, but also for smaller recreational vessels as well. Rely still on good old-fashioned aids to navigation, which, you know, are the green and red markers that you see out there marking safe water for vessels. We also participate because of our geography. We also have some years, we didn't last year have much of an ice breaking season, but we have the capability to do ice breaking. We do it with this vessel right here, who was born in the 1960s. She's still going strong. This is the Coast Guard cutter Pendant. By the way, in case anybody ever was curious, some things we call Coast Guard cutters, some things we call small boats. So anything 65 feet and larger is considered a Coast Guard cutter, so it has a CGC in front of it. Anything under that footage is considered a small boat. So Coast Guard cutter Pendant is very advanced and experienced in age, and does her job really remarkably well with a really small crew of only 7. And we dock her in Boston, but sometimes you'll see her up here if there is a need, but you all have a really fast flowing river, so so I'm not sure that you get Pendant up here. These are just some snapshots of some of our smaller aids to navigation boats. Another fun fact is if you see a Coast Guard vessel that has a black hull, like these two, we typically refer to those as working boats, work boats. Those are usually involved in aids to navigation work, ice breaking work, or something similar to that. Pendant can do both. Pendant breaks ice, but she also can work aids to navigation, which is what she's doing when she's not breaking ice. And she hardly broke any ice last year, so all aids to navigation work for her. safe and secure. It's part of our mission set. These are things that we talk about, we think about. We have very smart people assigned to work on threats and hazards, emerging hazards, trying to anticipate the future, and making sure that we're practiced and proficient across our entire team on how to handle any threat, any hazard, any crisis, any disaster. These are part of our DNA. You can't see in the back. It's terrorism, aging infrastructure in the form of impacts to any infrastructure that can impact the waterway, because the waterway is what we're paid to care about, as well as natural disasters. Obviously, hurricanes make the news quite a bit as causing a great deal of destruction, but up here we have nor'easters, we have coastal flooding that happen because of winter storms and such. So that's kind of what it looks like for us. And then global climate change. This is also an area that we're paying more attention to now, especially with water inundation along the coastline and how it impacts our facility infrastructure, our shipping infrastructure, as well as our own Coast Guard infrastructure, so that we make sure that we're able to still maintain a 24/7 posture going into the future, because you have to plan for that now. This is just a fun fact. At the national level, we have something called the National Preparedness Goal, and all federal agencies are mandated to get on board. It's not a new thing. It's been around for quite some time. The Coast Guard is very much embraced the National Preparedness goals and our mission sets and the way we organize to react to crisis or any sort of disaster response is all with an eye to being prepared and being aligned with the federal mandate to be able to the national preparedness goals. All right, so this is a fun one, number 5. And this is my public service announcement. This is where I need you all. So, paddleboard, that's in Boston Harbor. Station Point Allerton, these 2 kayaks are sitting outside Station Point Allerton Boathouse. And here, a little dinghy with an outboard on the back. That one was just 2 weeks ago. So I think we're up to 35. We do keep track. So it's 35 so far this year that have been reported to us anyway. I'm sure there are probably way more than that. 35 unmanned and adrift is what we call them. When we're working this, it activates our search and rescue system whenever something like this is found, because we have to rule out whether or not there's an actual emergency and whether or not there's a human or more humans affiliated with this unmanned and adrift vessel. So here's how this goes. So we get a call, radio, cell phone. We also have an app that we're on with local harbor masters up and down the coast. There's a number of ways we get the word. And so somebody reports that something like this has been found, an unmanned adrift. So we run basically it's a 911 kind of call center in Boston. It's crewed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Anybody see Chronicle not too long ago? Coast Guard station, Sector Boston was on Chronicle. If you're interested, you can probably Google that. They did a great little expose on our command center. It was called Behind Hidden Doors. Anyway, so we have like a 911 center. They are my initial responders that organize what our response is going to look like to any emergency, large or small. So the call comes in, we get the word, they notify the closest Coast Guard station, who then notifies their boat crew, who then gets sent to respond to the location that this is recorded at. And then also via our app, which is wonderful, we rely very heavily on our partnerships with harbor masters, maritime environmental police, state police. There are all kinds of folks who come together, fire departments come together in order to bring their assets to bear, because we have a lot of coastline and each of us only has so many boats and so many people, right? So folks, if they're nearby, just like kind of like a fire station, you know, 1 alarm, 2 alarm, 3 alarm fires or whatever, fire trucks from neighboring communities will come and help. The same sort of thing happens on the water. It costs us, the U.S. taxpayer, an average of $25,000 per hour for every hour that we are out searching because of one of these. And that depends, it varies, right, on how many assets actually, you know, end up going out and do a search, because we will run a search pattern for at least 1 hour with at least one asset. If we launch a helicopter, it's more to the right on the spectrum of cost. So every asset, that's fuel, that's the cost of that resource, and the person power behind it, you know, the calculation that we keep track of. We do it regardless, because that's our job. We're going to respond until we can ascertain whether or not there's no distress, and then we will call it off and bring the boat in. So what I need from all of you is any of you who have the smaller vessels that are not required to be state registered, where you know people who've got family members who've got canoes, paddle boards, small dinghies like this, please have them label them with a name and a phone number, because that's all it takes. A name and a phone number, we call, we can ascertain, oh, it blew off the dock, high tide came and took it off the shoreline, you name it. There's a whole spectrum of reasons why these end up adrift, but usually it's something like that. After high tides, astronomical high tides, we usually end up with a surge of unmanned adrift cases. Sometimes it can take a couple of days to manifest before they get spotted. But keeping your small craft secured saves the taxpayer dollars. It also saves me from burning out crews on something that's not an emergency. So while it's fun for us to collect kayaks at our stations, because it's great for a morale day if people don't come and claim them, it is very expensive, and it is an unfortunate use of resources. There is some element of practice, coordination and stuff that, you know, that we're able to get out of that as an experience, but we really should try to prevent these wherever possible, because it is wasteful. And it happens a lot. Like I said, we're up to 35 so far just this year, and that's up from last year, down from 2021, but up from last year. So I love kayaks. But they're expensive. Much more expensive than they actually will pay for. So we also love lighthouses in the Coast Guard. This is number 4. We have a number of them along the coast, but I thought I would just speak to you a little bit about Boston Light Station, just because we do have a little bit of news that's brewing here. So Boston Lighthouse has had a lighthouse keeper for a very, very long time. Auxiliarist, Coast Guard auxiliarist, Sally Snowman. Sally has announced she's going to retire at the end of this year, and she will be the last lighthouse keeper for Boston Lighthouse. So it's sad for us in that respect. She's going to miss it because she is very attached to Boston Lighthouse. She's written a number of books on Boston Lighthouse. Probably what we're going to do, we haven't really formalized plans yet. She probably is going to retire at the end of December, but what we'll likely do is in the late spring, probably in the late May time frame, we'll have a celebration of her career and the legacy of the lighthouse keeper history. Probably we'll hold it out in Hull at the Hull Life Saving Museum, because we can have a backdrop of the lighthouse. The lighthouse is very hard to get people to these days. because there's no floating pier there anymore since storms damaged the pilings a few years ago. Boston Lighthouse, as much as we love it, is very high maintenance for us as an organization. We actually don't have a budget specifically for the maintenance and upkeep of Boston Light or any of these outbuildings that you see with the keeper's quarters. That's the keeper's quarters over here, and obviously the lighthouse there. So all of these structures out there along the pier and the ladder require a great deal of care and feeding, which we take out of our operational budget because we don't have a line item to support it. So because of that, we're actually in the process of trying to hand the property over to the National Park Service. As they're able to be better stewards for it, they're able to raise funding for it, they're able to actually get a line item in their budget to support this remarkable historic location in the way that it deserves to be cared for. So it'll be sad for us when that day comes that we're able to transfer the property, but I've told the Park Service that I pledge continued Coast Guard presence because obviously it's very important to our Coast Guard history, this lighthouse. But also we have a team of dedicated auxiliarists who still do lawn maintenance out there. They still go out and check it after storms. Sally goes out there and wipes up water that gets blown in through the windows of the lighthouse up on the top of the light. She's got a whole system. It's remarkable. I don't know how many stairs there are, but she probably gets all of her steps in every time she climbs this. This is the largest order of Fresnel lens is still functioning at the top of this lighthouse, which is pretty remarkable. Our aids to navigation team, we will still own the lighthouse portion because the top of the lighthouse is an aid to navigation. We still will maintain that. We still will own that, and all of the care and feeding that goes along with it, which is quite substantial because of the age of the mechanisms and the structure up there for the lighthouse is pretty intense. We have our base in Boston, which is a different command. We have some pretty savvy engineer folks who've done some remarkable magic in sketching, diagramming, making parts, putting serial numbers on parts with parts diagrams and all kinds of things that I can't even talk about intelligently in order to help us keep that light going because it does go out frequently because of wearing of bearings and wheels and assemblies and all that kind of jazz. So there's a lot of work that goes into keeping this lighthouse functioning in the style in which it was created. It does have an emergency LED light, which it does not rotate, it's just a stationary light. The nominal range for this lighthouse is 24 miles. The nominal range for when it goes to emergency lighting, not rotating, is only 11, I think it's 11 miles. So a pretty remarkable difference in range of the light. But an awesome piece of Coast Guard history, an awesome piece here of life-saving history, and obviously, a shining example of what our national parks can bring for us too into the future to be able to care and feed for this property better. We also love emerging technology in Boston. As many of you are probably aware, we have all kinds of higher learning education facilities, institutions in the Boston area. You might have heard of MIT. MIT Lincoln Labs is a very big partner with us. They come out to visit us regularly. MITRE, also, which is a federally funded research and development center. MIT Lincoln Labs is also a federally funded research and development center. And then we have a number of emerging technology startup companies in the area that are working on all kinds of crazy, awesome, amazing technology, trying to solve problems in the maritime domain for a whole spectrum of reasons. And so what we've said to them, what I've said to them is, I can't buy any of your toys because I don't have a budget for that, but I am happy to open up the doors and provide you a small boat or a ship or people to talk to or to get underway with in order to test anything that you're working on. And if you want to come and hang out with my team and they can tell you the kinds of problems that we would like to have technology solutions for, like hoax calls, for example, come on in. Our house is your house, and we will give you as much access as we're authorized to give. So, we had a visit. This is just one example that I dropped into the slide. Has anybody heard of Boston Dynamics? So Boston Dynamics has a robo-dog. So here it is here. I wasn't savvy enough to put a video in my slideshow because I was late to the party on thinking about that, and I didn't have time to engage my smarter people who work for me who could have done it for me. So these are still shots, but this is the robo-dog. And the robo-dog came to hang out with the Coast Guard team for a day and visited one of the fast response cutters that I showed you earlier, the 154-foot new ship. MIT Lincoln Labs bought this dog for, maybe I shouldn't tell you much more. They bought this dog and they wanted to test its ability to self-stabilize on a moving platform underway. And they also wanted to test its ability to navigate up and down a ship's ladder. So that's what it came to do with us. This is when it was going back into the building. These young folks here work at the small boat station, and their ear-to-ear grins just made it so worthwhile, because for them to get to hang out with the robo-dog and be a part of the action while MIT Lincoln Labs specialists were doing some testing was just the coolest thing. So we get to intersect with a lot of cool technology. So here it is on the 45-foot response boat medium. They shut it down. It's got carrying handles. It's not that heavy, surprisingly. And they lifted it on. It sat obediently on the bow until they went out to the wake zone, because in Boston Inner Harbor is mostly a no-wake zone. They went out by the airport where the wake zone is not, well, there's not a no-wake zone, and they purposely put the boat into wake so that they could evaluate this dog's ability to self-stabilize and correct its posture given the unknown of waves, which was totally cool. So we gave them some feedback on some other things that we would like we would like this to be waterproof. This dog needs to be waterproof for us as well. But lots of great applications for this kind of technology for us, not just, I mean, this is probably not an application for us, quite frankly, but what is we have marine inspectors who go out and inspect those deep draft vessels or those inspected vessels like I was talking about earlier. And we have, there are some hazards, occupational hazards that come with ship inspection, not the least of which is confined space entry. And the ability to put a robot into a space that we would normally put a human in order to check structural integrity or check subsystem or check voids, you know, you name it. There's a whole host of places that are have hazards that then have to be cleared for human, but we wouldn't have to worry about that for a computer, basically, in the form of a dog. So there could be lots of great applications here for us. We're down to number 2. How am I doing on time? Am I a little over? Yeah, I'm good. I love working with awesome maritime-oriented people. So this is kind of my opportunity to talk a little bit. This just gives a broad spectrum idea of some of the different things that we do across the board, kind of a culmination of a number of those things that I've already talked about. I don't do anything, really. I have a team. I have a team of 1,500 people who do all of this work, right? They carry the authorities that have invested in me. They carry those authorities out to the field, out onto the vessels, out onto the shoreline, out to the facilities, out to the container yard. It's my team who do that. And we rely very heavily, like I was talking about with the harbor masters, we are so partnerships. We have been for decades. I've been in the Coast Guard for 30 years now. Boston has always been, and I've been in a lot of ports now. Boston is, and not just I say Boston, but it's the Boston area, right? I know this isn't Boston, but my area of responsibility, folks are always incredibly welcoming and willing to partner. And that's not only government agencies at all levels, federal, state, and local, but also nonprofit organizations and individual businesses who have a vested interest in this maritime interface. So we can't do anything without those partnerships. And so this is just a little glimpse of what that is. This top picture up here, this is our law enforcement team. This is Rose Wharf, right behind the Boston Harbor Hotel, if you're familiar with that area. There are a number of ferries and passenger vessels that pull up there. They're not all ferries. They do night cruises, dinner cruises, sunset cruises, that kind of stuff. So they were here, I believe this was Boston Marathon. So Boston Marathon every year, of course, since the bombing, Coast Guard is part of the boost in law enforcement presence around that annual event. And our role is along the waterfront, especially in areas where we have large amounts of people who congregate, and we have a large number of people who ride the ferries or ride the vessels. So increased risk there, and so we put out a larger law enforcement presence for that. So that's just a photograph of our team interacting with one of the captains of the vessels during that event. This is a shot of one of the rooms at our base where we have an incident command post. So like I said, we prepare for crisis. Crisis is very much a large part of our organizational personality. We plan for it, we prepare for it, we exercise scenarios around a variety of calamities in order to make sure that our folks are ready to respond. And also we have folks who work more in the prevention realm. We do prevention, we also do response. We prefer to prevent, but when something isn't prevented and it happens, then we need to have people who are also prepared to respond. So we really look at crisis readiness from those two lenses. That's the room that we use, and we've got folks that came together. This is also Boston Marathon. We also brought in the FAA there because we were also focusing on counter unmanned aerial systems from the base, working that mission set on the waterfront. And then this down here is folks checking nets of fishermen to make sure, looks like they're checking to make sure that the size of the holes in the nets are appropriate for regulation for whatever they were fishing for. And the #1 reason why it's awesome to be the sector commander is because I have the best team. Like I said, I don't do anything. I mean, I show up, I drink some tea, I get a brief here and there. They come to me when they need a decision. I make course corrections, you know, at our weekly staff meeting on what I want to see, on interactions and stuff. The routine things of the daily mission is done by a team of professionals who are attached to the sector and also to the sector subunits, and also who volunteer their time in the form of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So this is just a little snapshot of the folks and some of the activities. Yeah, 400 search and rescue cases, that's an average year. Nearly 2,500 vessel boardings, 568 vessel inspections, nearly 200 commercial fishing vessel inspections, and on and on. Sometimes you might hear that Coast Guard has 11 statutory missions. So anybody who's familiar with Coast Guard history knows that modern day Coast Guard is really, if you go back in our lineage, we're the fusion of many older services. And so that's why there's this variety of mission sets that some of them are historical, some of them are newer. Like search and rescue is a very historical mission set for the Coast Guard, just as an example. Ports, waterways, and coastal security, that's newer. That's really in the last, it even did predate September 11th, but September 11th gave us a whole slew of additional security regulations that we were mandated to implement. So just an example, the top 7 there in bold are the ones that we here in the sector, Boston, area of responsibility actually perform. The other 3 just don't really happen in this area of the country, but they happen in other areas of the country. As an example, if you want drug interdiction, then you go to Miami. And the Coast Guard in Miami is doing nothing but drugs and migrants, drugs and migrants, drugs and migrants missions. That's what they do all day long, 24/7. And I'm really thankful that we don't have either of those missions here, so I appreciate that. This is a snapshot of our organizational structure, just maybe put a little bit of sense into how we're organized in the core sector, the folks who actually work out of the building in the north end. So we have me, and I have a deputy who some of you will see tomorrow. He'll be here for the Rybacki Award. I have a command center, which is what I was mentioning. If you're checking into that Chronicle, it's like a 7-minute video on Chronicle for Hidden Doors. This is our 24-hour center. I have an intelligence cell where we're embedded with all of the other intelligence agencies in the Boston, Massachusetts area. I have a command master chief, and I have an emergency management team. And these are specifically kept out of these strands because they kind of run the entire spectrum. I was saying we kind of look at things from a response and prevention perspective. This is true across the Coast Guard. I have 3 departments because I have a logistics team who has to support the stations when their air conditioning goes down, or when the facility, they need new paving, or they need a new pier, or they need pier repairs, or a ship's got an engine problem, or you name your engineering problem, we've got them, and we have a team to deal with those. And then I also have an admin and a supply to help us with purchasing all of this stuff. And then these are my 2 operational strands right here, response and prevention. So this is where all of the work happens. In the Coast Guard, organizationally, it's safe to say you're either operational, you're performing missions, or you're performing mission support. So it's really kind of a bipolar organization in that regard. So no matter, you could pick anybody at any office, and they're either in this world or they're in this world. And so at the sector, I have a little bit of both, because I have to, in order to perform mission, you can't do a mission without mission support. So these are my mission people, and this is my mission support. And together as a team, they get it all done, and along with our subunits, whether those are our boats, or our ships, or our stations. It takes a village. And I think that's it.
Before we go to questions, first of all, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that today is the birthday of the Coast Guard. Of course, we are the birthplace of the Coast Guard. So we have a special role in that. And we have a gift for Captain Benson. We're going to, you can have this glass paperweight. There's an example of glass paperweight on the table as you leave, so you can take a look at it. Now, this isn't just any glass paperweight. Some of the things we have at our store are very related to Newburyport history. This glass paperweight has on it inscribed the Edmund and George W. Blunt Company. And let me give you a little bit of background of why that's important to Newburyport. The brothers Edmund and George William Blunt opened their business in New York in 1824, trading as the E&G W. Blunt Company. George Blunt was the secretary of the Board of Pilot Commissioners in New York Harbor from 1845 to 1877. He served as the first assistant of the United States Coast Survey. He made surveys of New York Harbor and the Bahamas, and he was instrumental in reform of the United States Lighthouse Service, which was one of the predecessors of the Coast Guard. His brother, Edmund Blunt, went to work in the Coast Survey, and they ran the family business until their death in 1866. That was New York. The connection to Newburyport is their father, Newburyport Edmund March Blunt, was a publisher of the American Coast Pilot, amongst other books. He started his business in Newburyport near the U.S. Custom House on State Street, when this Custom House was a wooden building on State Street. In 1810, he moved the business to New York at South Street Seaport. It's still there if you go down and look for it, at the sign of the Quadrant, where he continued to do his business. And he did marine surveys in the Bahamas and went Nantucket shows as well. So it's a key memento of the tie to Newburyport via the Blunt family. Thank you very much for speaking to me.
I'd like to give you a coin too. So I have the coveted Sector Boston coin that I'm going to give in a handshake. It's got Boston Lighthouse on it with a skyline of Boston in the background. And I just want to thank you for inviting me here today.
Thank you very much. Oh, and I know how precious these coins are. I understand you can buy with beers.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Anybody have any questions for me? Yes, sir.
I just have a comment to make. I'm a retired 26-year Navy captain, and I've observed the military, the Coast Guard, the Navy, and so forth. I'm highly impressed. I have laryngitis, but I'm highly impressed with the fact that the Coast Guard pushes their leadership further and further and further down than any other branch of the service. You have third-class petty officers in charge of boats. You have senior enlisted in charge of bases. Incredibly impressive how the Coast Guard spends so much time growing leadership at the lower levels than does the Navy or other military organizations. So a bravo Zulu to the Coast Guard.
The 6 new ships that I was telling you about, or I was calling them boats, the fast response cutters, the highest ranking commanding officer is a lieutenant. So they're either lieutenants, or they're lieutenant junior grades, or they're chief warrant officers who actually, and then for the Coast Guard cutter Sturgeon is actually commanded by a master chief. And then the small boats are all, the coxswains, can be a third-class petty officer. Yep.
I was at the commissioning of your most recent one, and I believe it's a master chief that's in command of that one.
Yes, ma'am.
This may be a stupid question, but you had a very exciting incident off of New Hampshire recently on a fishing boat where somebody fell. How long did it take to muster the correct crew and get the boat ready to go? Is that an impossible question?
So we have a lot of exciting cases off the coast of New Hampshire. Which one?
It was the one where somebody fell and hit his head.
Oh, so I believe we airlifted that.
Yeah, but you had a ship there first.
Yes, yes. So,
How long does it take to get,
it depends, so I don't remember how far offshore that one was, but of course it depends on how far offshore they are and where our vessels are in proximity to that. I believe, if I'm remembering that case, we had a small boat on scene to that vessel within a half an hour, and I believe we had an aircraft within an hour. Yeah. Now, the further offshore you go, and then you get in trouble, the longer our lead time is, unless we just so happen to have a larger Coast Guard cutter out. We have what we call ready cutters, so there can be a cutter offshore at any given time. It just depends on where they are.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
You're Boston Lighthouse. So the Coast Guard has been in all the lighthouses in the New England coastline. We've known various ones have been decommissioned over time. Some of those become museums, as we know, as Pop and Light, if I know it's here. Now, when Boston becomes decommissioned to the Park Service, Coast Guard, will that become a digital site?
So we anticipate still running that lighthouse. There's not been any plan to change that to anything other than the fully functioning lighthouse that it is.
Will it continue as the canal ends or more?
So that's been a subject of much discussion over a great deal of time. It takes a lot of power to run that light, and the power comes from Hull via a subsea cable, which is currently 10 years past its lifespan. Because it competes with all of our other shore infrastructure projects. So it's expensive to replace it. And so probably what's going to happen is it will be run to failure until it gets high enough on the priority list to find money to replace that cable. There have been studies done. Like I mentioned, those higher institutions have interns and things that like to talk about or research problem solving. We've had people out there in the past, I believe the most recent one was probably now 10 years ago, to evaluate the possibility of shifting that lighthouse to solar power. The problem at that time in the technology evolution of solar power was that there was not enough land out there to support the number of solar panels that would have been needed. We haven't gotten to it yet, but what we've talked about is we need to reinvigorate. Of course, we don't have a budget to fund a study for it either at the moment, so we rely very heavily on interested people who want to do things to write papers for. But technology obviously has changed radically in the solar power industry over the last decade, so it would be worthwhile to look at it again. But it does take a lot of power, but we just don't have an alternative to that subsea cable, which at some point will fail. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think about the possible offshore wind farms? Are they going to just change your way of operating, or?
So for me, they won't, because they're not going to be in my area of responsibility before I move on next year. So I'm thankful for that. I have a 3-year tour. My tour ends next year. We do have offshore wind in the development, obviously, but it's off of Cape Cod and the islands, and that's a different captain of the port zone. So yes, but I understand your question. Does it change life for us? It does change it for us in the ramp-up phase, because we get a whole lot of different types of vessels than we normally get in the port that are coming in, bringing parts, carrying parts of wind turbines, etc., workboats that are supporting this. So that's a whole different class of vessel than we're used to, so there's a learning curve for us there. The other thing that happens is as they get in the, once they're being installed, it's already been done, but the planning stage is for making sure that our search and rescue system is ready to be able to respond in the middle of a wind turbine field. That's probably our most pressing item, but it's totally doable, and it gets planned for and it gets practiced for sure. So it happens all around the world. It's just, there's a learning curve, and once you get through the learning curve, then it just becomes a matter of routine for us.
Thank you so much.